Okay, there are two introductions to the book of Shemot that are frequently studied when people begin the study of the book of Shemot. In our class, we focused a little bit more on the introduction of the Netziv, and here I want to contrast that introduction with the introduction of the Ramban. So take a look over here. You have this in your Chumashim as well, on page Aleph. Ramban tells us as follows: Hishlim hakatuv Sefer Bereishit, Shu Sefer HaYetzirah. The text, meaning the Chumash, completed the book of Bereishit, which is the book of creation, B'chidush ha'olam, in the creation of the world as new, Yitzirat kol notzar, and the creation of every creation, all the creatures of the world. Now, we all know that's not the only thing in Bereishit. The Bereishit is not just about the creation of the world, right? So is it really fair to call it the book, Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of creation, if most of it is about Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yosef? So the Ramban adds here, B'mikrei ha'avot, Shem ki'inyan Yetzirah l'zaram. It also told us about the events, the stories of the Avot, who are like the creators of their descendants. So us as Bnei Israel, looking back, we view the existence of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as part of what created our existence as an entity called the Jewish people. Ramban says, how is it that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are like the creators of us? Because all the things that happen to them, all those descriptions, that tzayer means to depict, all the depictions of things that happen to them hint to what's going to happen in the future. This is a phrase you may have heard called Maseh Avot Siman Levanim, which Ramban believes in very much. That which happened to the Avot, Maseh Avot, the actions of the fathers, Siman Levanim, they somehow allude or prefigure what's going to happen to us. And therefore, when the Avot did things, when Avram has to go down to Egypt, that's not just some ancestor of ours who happened to go down to Egypt. Ramban believes Avram's trip to Egypt played a major role in sort of symbolizing the idea that later as a nation we would have to go down to Egypt. And so Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, just by living their daily lives, were involved in an act of creating sort of this blueprint, this template for what was going to happen to us. After the Chumash completed the creation and completed the book of Bereishit, meaning the creation of the world and the stories of our founding fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it then begins a new book, another book, Sefer Acher, regarding items that come down from those clues or those allusions, right? So Avram went down to Egypt. Now we're going to learn about how all of Bnei Israel get enslaved in Egypt. And so this book of Shemot is designated to deal with the first exile, Hanigzar B'Feirush, which was explicitly decreed, right? God told Avraham at Brit Ben Abitarim and Parsha Lech Lecha that his kids would be exiled. Uvigeula mimenu, and this book is also going to deal with redemption from it, from this enslavement in Egypt, from this first galut. Ramban says that's why we have to begin again with the names of everyone who went down to Egypt. Right? Ramban is aware of the fact that if you look over here, this is very repetitive, right? All the stuff about the names of Yaakov's kids and how many kids there were, we know all that from the book of Bereishit. Says the Ramban, nevertheless, we have to repeat all that. Let's get back to his introduction over here. We have to repeat all that over here, even though we know it already. Even though it was already written in Bereishit, because that which happened that we already know about from Bereishit, that Avram, so that Yaakov and his kids went down to Egypt, that began the exile. So if this book is going to be a book about exile and redemption, we have to begin it with a flashback. Sometimes you watch a TV show with a part one, and then it says to be continued. And the next week before part two begins, it says, previously seen on the Big Bang Theory, and they give you a flashback to what happened the week before. So the Chumash has to give us this flashback, previously seen in the Torah, Yaakov and his kids, all 70 of them went down to Egypt, because that's the only way we can start this new book dealing with Galut and Geula. Now you might say, well, if this is all about Galut and Geula, why don't you end the book of Shemot as soon as they walk out of Egypt? That's it. At that point, we're free men. We're redeemed. So Ramban says, no. Hinei hagalut enenu nishlam ad yom shuvam al makomam ve'al ma'at avotam yashuvu. This galut, the exile we have in Egypt, the servitude, it's not really completed, or the redemption from it is not completed until we return to a similar state of being to what our avot were. Now, our avot were free; they were not slaves, but that's not all. They also had a certain spiritual achievements they accomplished with that freedom. When Bnei Israel left Egypt, even though they left the house of servitude, they were no longer slaves. They were still considered like exiles, like people in exile, even though they were free. They were still in a land which wasn't theirs, right? They're still in the wilderness. Lost, confused in the wilderness. Finally, when they make it to Har Sinai, they get the Torah, they get the Mishkan, and with the Mishkan, God's presence dwells among them. Finally, then, we can say, you know what, these people are now truly free. They're not just free in the sense that they're not slaves, but they're redeemed. They have achieved full redemption. Now, it's not totally full, because they're not yet in the land of Israel, but at least through the Mishkan, they have a little bit of that holiness that they're eventually going to attain in the land of Israel by bringing Hashem into their camp. So this is Ramban's perspective. Again, Ramban says the first book of the Torah is Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of creation. The second book is the book of Galut and Geula, the book in which God redeems us from servitude and exile. And in order to be redeemed, first he had to physically give us freedom, take us out of Egypt. But that wasn't enough. He also had to give us the Torah and have us build a Mishkan. And so all the things we're going to read about in Shemot, not just leaving Egypt, but also getting to Har Sinai, receiving the Torah, building the Mishkan, until finally, all the way at the end of the book of Shemot, in the last chapter, chapter 40 of Shemot, I don't know if we'll get there this year, all the way at the end of the whole chapter, we're finally told that God brings his presence into the Mishkan. This cloud of God is above the Mishkan, and a fire at night that represented God's presence. Finally there, when God fills the Mishkan, a couple of psukim earlier we're similarly told, Kevod Hashem Maleat HaMishkan, in Pasuk Lamed Dalet over here. Finally then are we truly redeemed, because we not only are free from being slaves, but we have God's presence among us. Let's compare this approach to what we saw in class from the Netziv. So the Netziv told us over here, Sefer Nikra b'fi Balei HaMidrash Sefer Shemot. Right? Typically in rabbinic writings, this is called the book of Shemot. That's how we know it. He quotes a couple of examples over here that I'm going to skip. He says, V'haramban b'sof ha'sefer kra'o Sefer HaGeula. The Ramban, as we just saw, he calls this the book of redemption, Sefer HaGeula. So that's a little different. That's focusing on the theme, right? Calling it Sefer Shemot is just focusing on the first phrase in the book, Ve'ele Shemot. Sefer HaGeula focuses on the theme of redemption. And Steve says, I found a more extreme view though. Zulat Rabbeinu HaBahag, the Bahag, who was much older than Ramban, the Bahag lived not that long after the Gemara was completed, in the beginning of the Gaonic period. He, at the end of his book, he lists the books of the Chumash, and he calls it Sefer Sheni. He says, look, there are 5 books of the Torah, Bereishit, Chumash Sheni, Sefer Kohanim, right, Leviticus, Chumash HaPekudim, the book of Numbers, U'Mishnah Torah, that's Deuteronomy in Greek. So, what's going on here, that the Bahag has a name for every book, but Shemot he calls Chumash Sheni. And Netziv is bothered by this. Give it a name. If you like the name Shemot, call it Shemot. You don't like the name Shemot, call it Sefer HaGeula, like the Ramban did. But you got to call it something. Right? But our English name Exodus is similar to Ramban Sefer HaGeula, right? Exodus, the book where we exited Egypt, also the book of our redemption, the book of our exiting towards freedom. But what kind of a name is that? The second book. So it says the Netziv, Ba'al Amdeinu Dzeh Sefer B'yichud, the Bahag is coming to teach us that this book specifically, Husheni LeSefer Reshit HaBriah, it doesn't really have its own theme, rather it's simply the second book, it's part 2, volume 2 of the book of creation. There's nothing new about the book of Shemot, rather it simply completes the creation from Bereishit. How so? How does us leaving Egypt or us getting the Torah complete the creation? So he quotes a medrash over here. Bet Reish stands for Bereishit Rabbah. The medrash in Bereishit Rabbah said, what does it mean that God created the world of Bereishit? It means he created it B'shvil Yisrael shenikru Reishit. That Bnei Yisrael, or God's, Reishit means first. We're like God's, first nation. And so he created the world for us. Meaning, tachlit, the tachlis, as we say in yeshivish English, the ultimate purpose of the world is shetei uma achad, there'd be one nation that's going to be the chosen nation of God, chelek Hashem amo. V'zeh lo nishlam ad sheyetzu mimitzrayim, and this was not completed until the Jews left Egypt. Uva'u l'tachlitam, when they came from there to their ultimate purpose, shiru uyim liot or goyim. Right? When we come to our ultimate goal, when we get to Har Sinai, when we receive the Torah, finally with the Torah, we have the capability of being what we call an or lagoyim, a light unto nations. We can't be a light unto nations. We can't chart a path of moral leadership for the world unless we have a value system to live by. So until we're as slaves in Egypt, we're not a role model for anyone. Until when we get the Torah, now we can say we have Torah values. If we live by those values, we'll be a model for all the nations. I'll skip a little bit over here. Says the Netziv, it turns out that leaving Egypt, that actually is the completion of the creation. Maybe not just leaving Egypt, because as we said in the Ramban, it's not enough to leave and to be politically free. It's leaving Egypt, or Matan Torah, maybe Matan Torah also, to leave Egypt and then have God give us the Torah. All of that means that we now are ready to fulfill God's purpose for us when he created the world. Right? When he created the world, he wanted there to be the group of human beings who would provide moral leadership for the world. He eventually settled on Abraham and later Yitzchak and Yaakov to be the ancestors of that group. And finally, when their descendants get the Torah, we can now try and achieve this goal. And he quotes a midrash over here that expresses this idea, Gemara Masechet Avodah Zarah, that says, "V'hi erev vayivokar yom hashishi." What does it mean that God, at the end of the sixth day, it was Yom HaShishi, the sixth day, as if it's like some official famous sixth day. So the way the Midrash interprets it is Shina Kadosh Baruch Hu Maaseh Bereishit Imakabli Yisrael HaTorah Mutav. That God said that Bnei Yisrael has to accept the Torah, that Hey and Hashishi is extra, because you look at the other days of Bereishit, it's always Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, why Yom HaShishi? So that Hey, according to this Gemara, is a hinting at the number 5, that the creation was finished on the 6th day, assuming that we'll eventually accept the 5 books of the Torah. Because without that, there won't be this ability for us to provide the world with moral leadership, and then God will regret creating the world. Therefore, says the Netziv in Sam, Nimtzad de Sefer Shemot, Hu Sefer Sheni Laharishon. Therefore, Shemot is second to the first book, because they really have the same theme of creating the world for the purpose of having a nation that will provide moral leadership for the rest of the world through Torah values. So I want to sum this up by asking, what do the Netziv and the Ramban have in common? It seems to me they have in common the basic idea that the book of Shemot complements the book of Bereishit. The two of them somehow go together, and there's some sort of unfinished business in Sefer Bereishit that's completed in Sefer Shemot. And yet there's a difference. Notice that for the Netziv, he's fond of this idea from the Bahag, that Shemot really has no independent identity. Right? We could argue there aren't really, it's not really the second book, even though he calls it Chumash Sheni. It's really like book 1 is Bereishit, and then Shemot is like book 1b, 1a and 1b. And you notice the Netziv, because of that, he hasn't really talked much about being slaves. It's all about getting to the bottom line, and that's going to complete the creation, namely getting the Torah. Whereas the Ramban, as much as he thinks that it complements Bereishit, he still talks about it as being a Sefer Acher, a separate book, a new book. And so, and for that reason, Ramban does elaborate a little more on the theme of exile. For Ramban, Shemot is a new book. The theme of this book is going to be exile and redemption. But if you're wondering what on earth does that have to do with the book of Bereishit, Ramban says they are linked by the fact that Bereishit, which had these stories of our Avot and the creation of the world, left off with the Avot in exile. And so according to Ramban, the book of Shemot is not completely lacking in its own identity. It has its own identity as the book of redemption, but that dovetails nicely with the end of Bereishit, because Bereishit found our avot needing to be redeemed from Egypt, and now we get to that redemption.